So many of us want to walk by the Spirit to understand the direction of our lives that comes from God. And hey, it gives us a lot of confidence if we know that the steps that we're taking are coming from God and that He is leading us and directing us in our daily life. In Acts chapter 16, we have Paul the Apostle and some of his companions who are doing what apostles do. They are sent to preach the gospel and to heal the sick. Paul and his companions are traveling, and they had recently picked up young Timothy in Acts chapter 16, verses 1 through 5. I'm going to read to you beginning in verse 6 of Acts chapter 16. Then they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia. They had been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. Now, this Asia is not Asia like we would think in our modern day globe and maps as China and the area of China and related countries. This Asia is modern day Turkey, and it's the land bridge between Europe and the Middle East. It was referred to as Asia Minor. Now, what is interesting about this is that they moved through an entire swath of land. They moved through this region of Phrygia and Galatia, and they were forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in the country of Turkey. Now, this is perplexing. To be forbidden means to be commanded not to do something. So, you mean to tell me that the Holy Spirit commanded the apostles not to do the thing that they were commanded to do, to preach the word? Well, this is confusing. Why would God do something like this? And He didn't just do it once. Verse 7 says, when they came to Mysia, they tried to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. Now here you have the Holy Spirit correlated with what Luke in Acts 16:7 refers to as the Spirit of Jesus. And again, they were forbidden. They were not allowed to bring the gospel to this very specific group of people at this time. In the first century, during this time, this would have cost money. This would have taken time. It might have been confusing for Paul and his companions. What is going on? Why is the Holy Spirit telling us not to do, commanding us not to do the very thing that we're out here trying to do in the will of God? Verse 8 says that passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision in which a Macedonian man was standing and pleading with him, "Cross over to Macedonia and help us." After he had seen the vision, we immediately made efforts to set out for Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. You see, God had a very specific assignment, a very specific appointment at that time. But it still makes you wonder, if God knew they were supposed to go to Macedonia, why not just tell them in the first place? Why all of that time? Why all of that energy and those resources spent going place to place just to be told no, when they could have been told exactly where to go from the start? These are aspects of mystery in walking by the Spirit. We try to be so wise, so religiously smart, and to think that God does things a certain way all the time, that He doesn't have the ability or the free will to choose how to do something at any given time. It's almost as though that we forget that God is a person, that He chooses to do things a certain way and for reasons that are not always disclosed to us. We can be wise in our own conceits. We can begin to think that we have things figured out, or that we know the way in which God does talk to us or is always going to talk to us, when that just might not be the case. We might not always know why He's leading us in a certain way and why we're being drawn to a specific course of action. This is very clear in the life of John the Baptist, who was called into the wilderness. This can be very clearly understood in the own personal feeling that John the Baptist may have experienced, not being a priest in the temple as his parents and according to his priestly lineage, but being called by the Spirit into a completely different route, in a completely different mode of action of ministry, and to be called a prophet. The Spirit has an eschatological aspect to it, and that's just a big word for a future aspect to it, an aspect that represents the things of the end. There's always going to be a certain level of mystery when we're talking about the person of the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus, because ultimately that Spirit is reflective of and operating on principles and ideas that are represented perfectly in a future kingdom. We don't understand them fully now. The Spirit represents what is coming, and we only get to experience it in part, and we thank God that we do experience it. But always remember and keep in mind that in your own life, when things are maybe unclear to you, when you ask yourself why it is that God's leading you the way that He's leading you, we have to remember that we are truly caught between two ages. By the Spirit that resides within us, that Holy Spirit, that Spirit of Jesus, we are right now in this age, in flesh and blood, and yet have a foretaste and experience of what's to come. And those two things will have a tension to them. They'll pull in opposite directions at times. As Paul said in Galatians 5:17, the spirit and the flesh, they're contrary to one another. They're in competition to one another. They'll pull you in opposite directions so that you cannot always do the things that you would. Even godly attributes, characteristics, godly objectives and achievements like preaching the gospel as an apostle, sometimes the answer will be no. Sometimes God will have us direct our attention and our energy in a different way at that time, even though we think what we're doing is exactly what God, the Holy Spirit, would have us to do.